Hello, welcome back. Hope you're doing okay. Today's video is going to be something a little bit different. I basically wanted to review the books that I've read this year, well, some of them, and journal about them at the same time so you can see that process. I've been reading mostly on my Kobo. I got this on Facebook Marketplace earlier this year, and it's been invaluable. Like, I love it. I've been getting books from the Libby app, like from my Toronto library card, and you do have to wait, but you get the ebooks and you don't have to go out and get books from the actual library, and it's free. So I've been able to read everything I wanted to this year. I went ahead and printed out some covers with my Canon Ivy to kind of put them in my book just so I can remember which books I read this year. And they came out so cute. I did 4 to each printer page, so they're pretty small. And I'm just gonna put the cover, I think, on my book, and then I'm gonna write just my little review beside it so I can remember. And yeah, we'll go through that process together. I picked 8 books. I read 23 books last year for 2023, hoping to do 24 for 2024 and so on, but I picked 8 that kind of stood out to me, and those are the ones I'm gonna journal about today. So grab a warm beverage and, sit back and we'll go through them together. So, one of the first books I read this year is actually one of the ones that stood out the most to me. It's called Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. This is the cover. I really like the cover art. It kind of gives away a little bit about what the book is about, but it's basically about a sort of shopkeeper cleaner of an aquarium who forms a bond with the octopus that's in captivity, and you get both their point of view, which is really fascinating. I didn't realize how smart octopi were. Is that what it is? Octopi? I didn't realize how smart they were. I don't know a lot about them, so this book was really informative, and it was cool because it's so intricate, and you get to kind of form a bond with an octopus and hear his point of view, and it goes back and forth between the octopus and the shopkeeper, and at the same time, it's also I would consider it like a cozy mystery, like a feel good mystery. Without giving too much away, the shopkeeper has gone through something kind of tragic, and she is thinking about it and talking about it with the octopus, and it sort of all ties together, and you find out how he's involved. Like the octopus had a part to play in this mystery, so it was really nice. I found myself getting really emotional, which was like unexpected. And I don't know, I just thought it was so unique. It was really intricate. The characters felt really real, and I have to say, like, I have never read a book with a point of view of an animal, let alone an octopus. So if that's something that interests you, I highly recommend this book. I thought it was so cool. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed that one. I gave that one 4 stars in my journal, and I gave it 4.5 on Goodreads, which I think is more accurate. I should have also put 4.5 in the journal. But yeah, I think it's very deserving. I didn't give it 5 stars only because I read a true 5-star book this year, which you'll see closer to the end. And that's sort of my standard now for reviewing books. But yeah, I think this definitely gets a 4.5 or a 4 for sure. So the next book I read, I think this was also earlier this year that this came out, is Happy Place by Emily Henry. This was a big release this year. I feel like everybody on my Goodreads was reading this, and it was anticipated. Like, everybody loves Emily Henry, and so do I. But to be honest, this one was a little bit underwhelming for me. I did like it. I liked that it sort of focused a little bit on platonic love there for a bit, but the actual romance was kind of like, I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but the romance was just like, I don't know, kind of toxic, a little bit unhealthy, and I just found the whole thing a little bit frustrating. Um, I don't know, it was okay. I really like Emily Henry's other books. Like, I love Book Lovers. I thought that one was great, and a few others, but this one was a little bit predictable, a little bit cliche. I did give it 3 stars because it wasn't the worst. It could have been a lot worse. And I liked the focuses on platonic love. I liked the setting. Like, I thought that she did a really good job of creating this like very nice summer kind of getaway, which I felt like I was right there. But the actual characters I found a little bit just difficult, and I wanted to write about this one just because it's memorable, and I wanted to remember my feelings about this particular Emily Henry book because I've given her much better ratings before. But yeah, as much as I anticipated this one, it wasn't my favorite. I would like to hear if anybody has read it and had different thoughts though, because I know this was a super popular book this year. So yeah, I gave that one 3 stars, and I think that's pretty fair based on how I felt about it. Next up, I think this also came out this year. This one's called Quarter Life by Satya Doyle Bayok. I hope I said that correctly. Um, I was in the bookshop and the cover drew this to me. I just thought it was so cool. I'd never seen something like that. And I realized it was about like the whole experience of being quarter life, being at that phase of life. And a lot of the book describes what exactly that means, like what phase of life that is. A lot of people assume that's just when you're 25, but the author kind of goes in and explains what exactly makes it your quarter life and what point of life you can be in your quarter life in your 30s, which I think is interesting. And there's a lot of really good research in this book. It's a nonfiction, sort of just everything encompassing being in your quarter of life. And I really liked it because it was well researched and it was informative. And I also found it very validating. Like, a lot of the struggles that we go through in our mid 20s and 30s, it's not just us, it's not personal. A lot of it is societal and some of it's genetic. So I thought that was really interesting. I learned a lot. I found it really validating. The only thing and the only reason why I didn't give this more stars, I gave it 3.5, is because I found it a little bit boring sometimes. The author is a therapist, and some of the client stories, like, I just found were a little bit repetitive. It dragged on a little bit, but that being said, I still think it's worth a read. It was good, and if you're at that phase of life and want someone to validate you, I think this is a great read to reach for. Okay, I feel like I was a little bit harsh with the last two, rightfully so, but I also don't want this to be like a review of just like books I didn't really like that much. So the next one that I have is Wild by Cheryl Strayed. This was on my TBR for so long because I saw the movie a long time ago and I've heard of this story many times, but I never like proper sat down and actually read it. This one, it just like tugs at my heart. This came out a long time ago, but I think it's really, really worth a read. I read it because I was actually backpacking earlier this year and I wanted to read a book that sort of had that outdoorsy theme. And it's basically about this lady named Cheryl who is reflecting on her younger self going through sort of a series of traumatic events and then sort of up and deciding to hike the PCT with no backpacking or hiking experience whatsoever. And someone on Goodreads named Maxwell kind of summed up my thoughts perfectly. He basically said that Cheryl now has a tenderness for her younger self, that even though she was reckless and disagreeable as a young person, she wins us over now. And that's exactly how I feel about this book. Like, you're reading what she does and what she thinks as a young person, and it's so hard to read because she's very, very difficult to like and goes through a lot of really horrible stuff, and makes a lot of very questionable decisions. But as I guess Cheryl was writing this, she has a lot more insight and understanding and empathy for her younger self, so it comes off very endearing and she's able to frame it in a really nice way. I also just love like the perseverance kind of stories where it's like somebody with no experience conquers something amazing. So it's a bit of a feminist read, it's a very inspiring read, and it is a little bit triggering, so if you're not in the mood for that, skip this one. But it's a really, really nice memoir, and I gave that one 4 stars here, and I think I gave it 5 on Goodreads, so that was definitely a good read this year. So up next was another 4-star read for me this year called British Columbiana by Josie Teed. I think this was a smaller book that came out this year. I looked on Goodreads and it only has 150 ratings, so I think it's pretty like indie. But I really enjoyed it. It's an account of this young girl from, I think, Toronto. I could be wrong, but she basically moves from a city and accepts a job in this very, very small, like, gold rush town in BC. And she becomes a, like, I think 19th century historical reenactor for a summer. And this town has a lot of tourists, but other than that, like the closest grocery store is like an hour away. There's no cell reception, and it's kind of one of those towns where, everybody knows everybody in a very intricate way. And so it's her account of moving there as somebody from somewhere completely different, getting that rural experience while also trying to fit in with all the people that have lived there their whole lives, and so as their families. So it's really interesting. You kind of see the way that she debates like what's important to her between like safety or stagnation, I guess, in this small town versus like growth and change. Like if she were to move, and she ends up kind of enjoying her place there, and you get the sort of good and bad perspective of both ways of living, right? Like the way that she lives in this small town is very different than what she's used to, but she also gains a lot of really interesting experiences and meets a lot of wonderful people. So I really liked that. It was witty, it was funny, there was some heartfelt moments. It felt relatable, like hearing the way like a young Canadian girl talks, like it just felt like I was reading a book from a friend. So I really enjoyed that. And if you're looking for something similar, it's a good summer read too because it takes place over one summer. So yeah, I gave that 4 stars. I think that's rightful. Up next, this one honestly took me for a ride. This was recommended to me from my favorite like local bookstore. One of the people working there recommended this to me because I asked for a campus romance specifically because it was, I don't know, it was fall and I wanted like a cute campus romance. This one's called Mrs. S by Kay Patrick. This one, okay, the only reason I gave this 4 stars and not 5 stars is because the author has this sort of Sally Rooney like lack of punctuation type thing going on, and I honestly hate it. I really tried, and I do like, I love the writing prose, but the lack of punctuation, it just killed me. I found it hard to get through in that way. But the actual story, the setting, the description, like this was fantastic. It's basically about um, this young woman, and it's interesting because no one in the book has names except for Mrs. S, and that's all we know about her. But it's basically this young woman that accepts a job at a very prestigious all girls school, and she starts to sort of fall in love with the headmaster's wife. I don't know if it's just because I watched Sex Education recently, but I kind of pictured Mrs. S looking like Gillian Anderson, so it makes the whole thing really wonderful. But this is just a really like slow burn, kind of sapphic like love story, and it's a very interesting ending. I don't want to spoil anything because this was a really really good read, and I would almost reread it. But you're kind of just like getting little tidbits from Mrs. S. It's a very stop and go situation. You don't know what's going to happen, and I just really liked this. So I gave that 4 stars out of 5, only because of the lack of punctuation. So this next one was a bit of a guilty read. That's why I'm covering it. It's Echo War, A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J. Maas. I read the first 2 books of this series last year, and I was so frustrated with them that I took a year off. But I kept hearing everybody talking about it, and I'll be honest, I was curious to know what happened. So yes, I read this one, and then I read the one after that, and the one after that. But I don't know. I get really frustrated with this series because this is going to sound brutal, but I find them written a little bit like a Wattpad fan fiction, but I think that's why people like them, and it's so dramatic, it's crazy, it's a romance, and I gotta say, I do like it. I want to know what happens, so I read it. I gave it 4 stars out of 5 just because I think the world building is pretty good. It's definitely immersive, and they're so long, like, there's a lot of room for Sarah J. Maas to write a really intricate and detailed story. So yeah, I did enjoy that. It brought me back into my acotar phase. I'm currently actually reading A Court of Silver Flames now, so I'm almost done. And it's interesting getting Nesta's perspective. So yeah, I'm not done. Don't spoil it for me, but I did really enjoy this series. And yeah, maybe I'm a little bit embarrassed to say that, but I did rate that on this year's uh, list of books because I don't want to forget that I read it. And yeah, if anyone has recommendations for which SJM I should go for next, I'm getting a lot of Crescent City recommendations, so I think that's what's going to be for 2024. Okay, so remember how in the beginning of this video I said that I had a 5-star read this year? Well, this is it. If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. This was probably one of the best books, not only that I read this year, but that I've read in my entire life. And I've read a lot of books, so that's saying something. I gave this 5 stars out of 5. I don't know, this is what made me want to ask for another campus. This isn't really a romance, but what made me want to ask for another campus book when I went to the bookshop in the fall, because it was just fantastic. If you haven't read it yet, just read it. I feel like you don't even need a synopsis, like just read it. It's so good. But it is about a group of theater students that go to this very prestigious university, and a murder happens, and it's a very intense, like dark kind of mystery, but it also explores the relationships between the friends and between their perspectives. And I don't know, there's not much else to say other than that. It's very like suspenseful. The world building is fantastic. The writing is just like delicious. This is such a good book. So 5 stars out of 5. If you haven't read it, go read it right now. And I really hope this author comes out with some more stuff because I can't take it anymore. Like, I want more books. This was so good. I think I will reread this. Out of all the books that I've read this year, I think this is one of the only ones that I would reread. And it was just great. So that sort of sums up everything I read this year. Going forward, I think I'm probably just going to read another mixture of stuff going on. Like, I probably will read either Throne of Glass or Crescent City. If you have something to say about that, let me know which one I should read next. But yeah, I'll just be reading kind of what comes out, what catches my eye. I'm not like married to any particular genre or author. I'm open to anything. I love nonfiction, I love fantasy. But yeah, in terms of some other books that I read this year that I think deserve an honorable mention, I read Book Lovers by Emily Henry, which I really liked. I gave that 5 stars. I also read Moon of the Crusted Snow by Wabgeshig Rice, which was also fantastic. That's an Indigenous author who wrote a really great dystopian novel. I read I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy, which was another huge release, I think last year. That was fantastic as well. Gave that 5 stars. I read Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. I like that too, not as much as the others, but that was a really interesting kind of time traveling read. Read some bell hooks. The Will to Change, that was fantastic. And another one I read this year that I actually should have mentioned here is called Ducks, 2 Years in the Oil Sands by Kate Beaton. That one's a graphic novel, but it was really good. It's another kind of experience and perspective from a young girl getting a job in a rural place. In this particular instance, she got a job at like an oil production sands in Alberta and her account working there. Then yeah, like I don't know, I read a few other great ones this year and I think it was a good year for books. And next year's going to be even better. If you want to follow me on Goodreads, let's be friends. I'll link it down below. And yeah, we'll keep up to date on what we're reading. And yeah, we'll see what happens with the rest of acotar. I'm almost done, and I'll update about that on Goodreads too if you're anticipating my review. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have recommendations for what kind of video I should make next, let me know. And if you think there were some books I should have read this year that I did not, please let me know, and I will read them next year. So thanks, take care.